Paperback Rocker, episode 88. Hey, this is Matt Severson, the Paperback Rocker, and I'm broadcasting from my 6x9-foot cinder block shack in the desert of northern Mexico, southern Texas. Welcome and thanks for checking out my show.
Names have been changed to protect the guilty.
Hey everybody, what's up? It's your old friend Matt, the Paperback Rocker. That would be Matt Severson, spelled Syverson. And my books are on Amazon, Amazon. You can order them there. So let's get right into the reading. Because usually I record two of these in the same evening, and any monologuing I feel like doing will probably be on the first one. So we will join Stanton Wheelhouse in the novel Blue Whiskey, written by yours truly. And Stanton has just gone to England to open up 3 shows for Mr. Bob Dylan, which was, somewhat like his kind of introduction to international stardom. All this stuff is real as far as these musical or historically rock and roll based historic events in my book. They are real. And so you'll see Stanton takes part in more and more and more of them. So he has gone and opened up for Mr. Robert Zimmerman, who changed his name to Bob Dylan. And everybody, even while Stanton was playing, was talking about Bob Dylan. So he just has told Ben, you know what, I want to give up. And they're sitting talking in the hardware store. Okay, as we begin, volume 32 of Blue Whiskey on page 180. And Stanton has just asked for a job in the hardware store. You know, he can mop floors well from working at the Thirsty Possum for Reuben. Can I work for you here in the hardware store? I can mop the floor in no time. I'm a great mopper. You're a great musician. You really want to spend your time cleaning floors? No, but how can I continue as a musician without a guitar? I had explained to him the destruction of my precious Gibson, which my other friend Reuben had given to me. I hadn't talked to Reuben in forever. How can I manage a musician who doesn't play? He said. A musician who desires a mop in hand in place of his guitar. That's no good. Ben set his left arm on the counter and gazed at the tattoo that matched mine. His eyes grew far away, and I knew he was thinking of Chaim. I watched him for a while. I placed my hand over his tattoo, bringing him back to our discussion. We both know we can't quit, Ben, I said. Now you're trying to convince me you can't quit? I seem to remember you just trying to convince me that you should quit. A temporary lapse in perspective, I said. That's all it was. There's always people worse off than us. That's why we got our tattoos, right? To remind us of that. Hell, I just opened for Dylan. How bad can it be? Right. I need to work on replacing your instrument now. Do you mind mopping the shop like you said? I'd like nothing more than that right now. It helps me think. Perspective, said Ben, pointing at his tattoo. Perspective, I answered. For Chaim. Ben went to the store's little office with all his father's trappings still intact and closed the door behind him. I searched for and found the mop and bucket. By now I had learned where to sneak up on them. I swabbed the deck and my mind wandered, hypnotized by the figure eights I made on the floor. As much exploring as my brain did, all it found was numb indecision. This feeling remained for days, and it scared me. It eventually wore off, and I came to understand years later that I had a light dose of what is now called post-traumatic stress disorder. The trauma being Chaim's passing, London's disastrous shows, and the death of my Gibson and my Ray-Bans. Ben stepped out of the office, and shut the door behind him. He called out, "Stanton!" In the back, I heard footsteps on the still wet floor, and Ben spoke before I saw him. "We're meeting Joan Baez at the coffee shop in half an hour." What on earth for? I despised Baez. "She's bringing you one of Dylan's guitars. I talked to Grossman, and he talked to Bob, and Bob talked to Baez. Bob sends his condolences regarding your Gibson." "A loaner?" "Nope, it's all yours." Knowing Baez, she'll bring me a piece of shit beater. "What have you got against her?" "I don't know. I know what it is. I know what it is. Illuminate me." "She's Dylan's groupie, and you don't have one." "Not since Chaim's gone." We laughed and almost felt normal. It was good to think of Chaim in this way. We smiled, and we were brothers in that moment. The appointment was met with Baez, and she blessed me with an older version of my Western body, but it was a Martin. That was a good thing. A Martin guitar sounds best from about 10 years old to 25. That's the sweet spot, and Dylan's hand-me-down was somewhere right in the middle. My bias against Baez was tempered for the moment. I saw a glimmer in her eye that might have made me pursue her if I had not been so smitten with my new guitar. Later, back at the hardware store, Ben and I sat talking, sipping coffee to keep warm in the drafty shop. "Is my residency over at the bricklayer?" I asked. "I'm afraid so. There's a teenager named Harry Chapin taking your spot. He's not too good, but he shows promise." "What about Tuesday?" "Stanton, we do not go from Thursday to Tuesday." "I'm goddamn sick of all these places in the village," I said. By that time, I had played Cafe A Go-Go, The Bitter End, The Gaslight, Bottom Line, Folk City, and Cafe Wah dozens of times. I always liked Cafe Wah because it was run by a man named Roth, and his nephew, David Lee, was sometimes there, and he was very fun to interact with. Playing farther out in the city will only mean more travel and smaller crowds," said Ben. "I've got something else in mind, Ben. I need a fresh of breath air. I want to get out of the city." "You just got out of the city." "London is not getting out of the city. The pollution was terrible. Everybody burning fires in their chimneys and the smoke settling down in the fog. Terrible. Not to mention all the smoke from Dylan and his entourage." "Well, instead of us circling each other like wrestlers at the start of a match, how about you just tell me what you're thinking?" Ben said. "I'm thinking I'm overexposed. Every beatnik, folkie, and hipster in the village has probably seen me 15 times. And my set list hasn't changed since I got here. I'm so busy with gigs, I don't have time to work on new material. I need to get away. I need to play for my people." "Aren't New Yorkers your people?" "Don't answer that." "Right, I'm from Mississippi. Most New Yorkers can't even spell the word." "How on earth do you remember it?" "M-I, crooked letter I, crooked letter I, humpback I." "What's that, some kind of chant?" "Closer to a jump rope rhyme." "Are we getting any closer to you telling me what you're thinking about, Stanton?" "I need to hit the road. I played impromptu gigs on the way here from New Orleans, and they were awesome. No hipper than now crowds, just regular folks. Those are my people." "You're convincing me, Stanton. You've made a statement here in New York, but going away for a while might make the locals miss you." "Because I'm overexposed." "That's exactly the term I was searching for." I now believe the conversation we had that day about overexposure was the genesis of the concept as it relates to an entertainer or celebrity. At the least, I'm claiming ownership of it as an intellectual property until proven otherwise. So it was decided I would hit the road and give the New Yorkers a break from Stanton Wheelhouse III, and I would rejuvenate myself in the process. Driving south, retracing my passage into the city, I was exhilarated. Wanderlust purred like a tiger, having had an oil change and received 4 new tires in recent days. I held within me the knowledge that I was doing what was right for me, and because of that, I was at peace. I had been in the big city long enough. I needed to break away, and I was breaking away at just the right moment. Newport News had not changed in any recognizable manner. The arch was just as tall, and the Howard Special at the Crab Shack was just as good. I kept my head down while eating and was not recognized. Back on the highway, I drove just under the speed limit, for I was in no hurry. I had the passenger window rolled down, which supplied a nice breeze of salt air. I avoided the Atlantic, the scene of my epic, soul-searching, blue whiskey-fueled tantrum. I needed to drive, not walk on the beach. And I drove with the radio off. For a musician as immersed as I had been for the last year, this was like fasting, Gandhi style. Please remember, I am writing this book now, not then. I had no idea who Gandhi was at that time. Of course, Dylan was an expert on the man. He told me all about Mahatma when we snuck off to India in 1969, and a year after the Beatles fiasco with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. At least they got Dear Prudence out of the experience. Me and Dylan got nothing but food poisoning. Bob and I have always been on-again, off-again friends, purely by his choice. We were acquaintances on the first trip to London, friends on the second trip through the incident at Newport, then friends again in the later years of the 60s. And that was the end of it. But I'm sure I could call him up today and we'd have a great talk. That is, if I could get through all his gatekeepers. It would be much easier if he called me. Back to the highway. In October of 1962, my favorite author, John Steinbeck, put a book out called Travels with Charlie. Charlie was his dog. I read it on the flight to London and had carried it with me since. Regardless of what I told Ben, in the back of my mind, I knew I wasn't traveling to play random gigs. I needed to challenge a few windmills / imaginary giants and get my confidence as a songwriter back. I glanced at the book sitting on the passenger seat with the wind moving the paperback's warped cover and smiled. I wished I had a dog like Charlie. By 2013, the year I am writing my autobiography, Travels with Charlie had pretty much been outed as far as being more fiction than nonfiction. Steinbeck, being as talented a writer as he was, couldn't resist making up most of the dialogue in the book. But without actually recording the conversations, is this such a crime? I choose to believe they were paraphrased rather than being wholly invented. Steinbeck was in his latter years, and I think he wanted to document an America that only remained in his memories. I can understand what he did. Back then, there was no internet, and men could create things, even themselves, if they so desired. Steinbeck's simple masterpiece of Mice and Men is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, and it's the same thing Reuben tried to explain to me when we first met. Men once had the power to create their own backstory. George and Lenny reinvented themselves at every new job site. There were no background checks back then. The most minor indiscretion now follows a man forever, trailing behind him like a digital ball and chain. I've known people who have had 1 month or two in an otherwise exemplary life, and it's never the same for them. I'm not talking about something like murder. I'm talking about things that don't hurt anyone. That's me on my soapbox in 2013, but that is also the type of thinking I was developing. Driving around in my Chevy in the early 60s, I observed taking in a million stories, but barely spoke to another person. I think that's the way Steinbeck did it too. There's no need to give a play-by-play like I did on my trip from New Orleans to New York City. It wasn't the same. On this journey, Wanderlust was like a capsule, and I spent very little time outside it. I didn't need people teaching me about life. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to watch things, distill thoughts, and ferment ideas that would become my next songs. The reason for that, I think, is that I had gone through so much since leaving home, but had never really incorporated those things into me, into the adult I was becoming, that is. At some point, every person does it. It's like getting out of a swimming pool. The water is all the experiences through childhood and the teenage years. The time in the pool is total immersion and very reactionary, treading water, struggling to survive, and somewhat out of control. Then at some point you get out of that pool, just as every bird must spread its wings and fly from the nest. It's scary at first, but then you feel free. The water drips away, and you can climb a mountain or a tree or something, so you can look down on things from a different perspective and dry off. You find a sunny plateau and sit down and think for a while, and you become you. All right, I'm going to stop there. That's page 185 near the bottom. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. We've still got, we're getting close to 2/3 of the way through. Maybe not, maybe we're about 58% of the way through right now. So I will see you soon with the next episode. I hope you have a great week and have success in whatever you are endeavoring to succeed at. Have a great week, my friends. I'll see you next time.
The Paperback Rocker has signed off.